Sports Betting, a look into the future.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm standing in, so there's been a slight change in the running order. You're probably expecting to see somebody else. But I'm going to talk about the future of sports betting. And to set the context for that, I'm going to talk about my background just for only a minute, I promise, because it raises some of the issues that have evolved during my 40-year career in sports betting. So I started off with betting shops. 90% was horse racing, only 5% was sports. Digital came along into my life, at least in '96, and there was no software to license. We were the first UK bookmakers who began trading online in '98. And a couple of big things about that: we had a competitive advantage being down in the Channel Islands, whereas the UK had betting tax. But more relevant, the UK required a minimum of trebles in a bet. We were allowed to offer singles. The reason for the UK position was to avoid match fixing, but we were able to demonstrate, along with others who followed, that betting singles on football is fine in general. Over the years, we moved into different geographical markets. We saw new sports, obviously North America, the American sports. Football is probably the driver through Europe, LATAM, and Asia. And overall, we've seen huge growth with other factors coming along. We've seen new bet types. In particular, things like bet builders and scorecasts, where it's possible for the consumer to build their own bet. And also, related contingencies can be priced effectively. By that I mean that if you have a player to score a goal in a game, historically you could not bet that in a double with his team to win because the one event influenced the other. These days that's all built into the pricing. So, going forward, we're talking about evolution, not revolution. Digital was the last bit of revolution, I think, and then everything else, as I've touched on, with market and product, has been evolving. There are other aspects to this. Mobile. Mobile has been a huge driver for reasons that I'm sure you're all aware of, as has live betting. Previously, all bets had to be pre-match. Now, live betting in the game. Originally, in terms of a limited number of markets, total goals, who's going to win, but now moving on with micro-betting into a much wider range of markets. And regulation. I'm not just going to talk today about the operational side of things. I'm going to talk about some of the other factors, the ethical factors. Regulation is related to that. Of course, no talk like this could ignore the technology advance. It's getting faster and faster, and I've heard an awful lot at these conferences in the last 2 or 3 years about AI. Initially, I think a lot of that discussion was around the potential. But now, these days, working as a technology investor, I can see that AI is becoming real, and it's on a journey. There's a lot more to come, from rules-based systems through machine learning to real generative AI. We've got blockchain. Consumers, increasingly the younger demographic, like this because they feel it's greater trust and transparency. And crypto. Very few operators would not be using crypto in some form or another for payments, or quite frankly, some of the grey market operators use it for moving money around as well as a payment. And we've seen the growth of crypto-only operators who've been hugely successful. Emerging markets. We're in a phase of regulation. It's only, 5 years ago that the US, in the form of New Jersey, regulated sports betting after PASPA was repealed. We've got a whole wave of regulation coming through Africa, South America, and maybe a few more US states still to come. Asia appears to be more resistant. So, I've already touched on the US. The regulatory trends that come with regulation, we've been through the KYC, age verification. Regulators are increasingly concerned with the issue of problem gambling and responsible gambling and affordability. Technology now is able to capture the markers of harm, and I see a lot further growth in this area as we will see complete end-to-end solutions built into operators' platforms. Regulation, the driver for regulation is taxation. So I think you can assume quite safely there'll be governments wanting to raise more tax who will regulate more forms of gambling and more countries who are yet to join in. We need responsible gambling. At the moment, though, it's incredibly difficult for the big operators. There isn't standardization. For example, 38 states in the US, most of whom want servers in their state, and as a result of that, an operational nightmare for operators. The EU is in a similar position. There's still more regulation to come, but again, the per-country regulatory model does not help operators. If the governments aren't going to help the operators, maybe there's going to be a lot more they can do with technology to build out of single stacks into proxy servers. Sports betting has come a long way in the last 20 years. Public perception is generally positive, and that's one of the big growth factors. But others less so. Some sports organizations, and I'm thinking of things like snooker, darts, and to some degree football, have embraced it. They see it as a source of revenue. Others less so. But even Google now increasingly accepting advertisements and recognize it. And we're seeing more sports betting related content coming in on the media, talking about the odds on games. However, I can't talk about this growth without raising a couple of the ethical questions. Addiction and sometimes causing mental health or separately mental health. We need technology to identify the markers of harm, to look at that, that percentage cohort which are showing signs of concern so that an increased due diligence can take place. Match fixing. We've heard from the previous panel, it's an issue in esports. Good to hear they're on top of it and people are talking about it. It exists as well in some forms of sports betting, and I'm not going to go into the particular verticals where it's more prevalent, but I'm sure everybody has read stories of cricket, for example, but that's but one example. Again, capturing the data is going to be able to allow operators to identify events that are a risk. And by having a regulated industry, the sports betting operators are able to be the whistleblowers to those sports organizational bodies, and this is happening in practice. So regulation, technology, that's an area that's moving forward, and I would expect to see increasing science and understanding around that. It's going to be a regulatory challenge as well, because some of that technology can identify those who are at risk, but equally the same tech can identify those for whom maybe the operator is not getting the full potential value from that customer. So, for example, upsell opportunities. That is, in my opinion, a real regulatory dilemma. A great growth driver is the innovation, more markets, but we're also starting to see some new verticals. The terminology, probably sweepstakes in the US, prize draws or lottery type models, certainly in other parts of the world, including the UK. And this is a model usually starting with free play, where people can take part in an event with free tokens, and when the tokens are used, of course, they can always purchase some more. These events can be linked to sports betting, and I think that's going to be a trend we're likely to see, because the appeal of that business model hits a much wider percentage of the population than full-on hardcore sports betting. Governments are going to obviously look for new revenue sources, as we've mentioned, and I'm glad I have mentioned esports, because whilst it came along with a lot of hype and it hasn't lived up to that hype, I do believe that there are going to be other technical advances which are going to help make that continue to make progress, albeit at a steady pace. Probably thinking virtual reality here. Technology, some of the trends, the marketing efficiencies. Imagine a scenario where your CMO has his budget and the machine is telling him how much to spend on customer acquisition, how much to spend on retention, and how much to spend on reactivation. My point being here, combined, this is the holy grail in terms of being able to optimize the return on marketing investment. Odds setting and risk management. I think generally the operators do a good job here, but the next step, in my view, for this is going to be getting predictive. Not necessarily looking at the odds from a pure mathematical perspective on the probability of team A or team B, but wouldn't it be great if you knew in advance where they're more likely to bet? Operators see this, where certain teams have their favorites and a disproportionate amount of money, i.e. emotional betting, comes. It's great to be able to actually predict that. Automation is a consequence. That leads to lower operating costs. And finally, just touching on RegTech, there are companies now, I'm aware of one in the very latter stage of a total end-to-end solution, where the whole package from the KYC, onboarding, source of funds is all automated. The same platform is doing the actual transaction monitoring, whether it's payments, whether it's actual betting transactions. It's automating case management for those who are outside the percentage of normality. And ultimately, I think it's going to be a solution which regulators are going to love. A couple more trends. I touched on virtual reality in relation to esports, but imagine the potential. By the way, I'm not saying virtual reality is there yet, but imagine the potential of being able to walk into your favorite sportsbook, maybe on the Strip in Las Vegas, in your virtual world. Imagine being able to have the feeling in your hands of counting the cash, as opposed to just looking at a digital number of the balance of your account after a winning has been credited. The media is going to get more interactive. That's going to create both opportunities for existing operators, but we've already seen the likes of ESPN Bet in the US. The media, with their distribution, I think eventually we're going to see more moves like that. In the UK, of course, Sky Bet were the pioneers. The personalization that AI is going to bring. Operators are getting better, but it's still clunky. There's absolutely no reason why there could not be total personalization. When a consumer comes onto a website, sees the sports that they want, sees everything that's appropriate to them. And again, that's going to increase revenue. So lots of growth drivers. As an investor in the sector, I'm excited. I've given you a flavor of some of the factors I think are going to continue to evolve in the future. It's always been an entrepreneurial industry. Technology is advancing that. One note of caution in my last few seconds. AI. Everyone's talking it up. It's your friend. The reality is there are hackers out there. It could be your enemy. I'm predicting operators are going to have to spend a lot more on their cybersecurity. Thank you very much.